It is our great honor, and it is my personal honor to chair this session with Professor Moon Chung-in. Before I will ask Professor Moon to deliver his speech, I would like to say a few words about him. Apart from that, he is a very good friend of our institute. Professor Moon is also chairman of the Sejong Institute and vice chair of the APLN, Asia Pacific Leadership Network for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. He is also editor-in-chief of Global Asia, which I believe he has brought with him here. So you can have a look, and you can surely read not only this issue. Professor Moon has served as a special advisor to South Korea's President Moon Jae-in in the field of unification, foreign and security affairs. But he has also a very rich and distinguished academic career and holds a variety of academic positions, mostly at Yonsei University in South Korea, but also at University of California, San Diego, University of Bath in the UK. He was also based at Woodrow Wilson Center, Beijing University, and others. And he has co-authored, and edited over 300 articles and 56 volumes in various academic journals. President Moon also had distinguished governmental experience, not just as a special advisor, but also at the cabinet level post under President Roh Moo-hyun, also as an ambassador. And from what I recall from our last meeting, you actually attended all summits with the DPRK, starting in 2007, and also the most recent ones. So obviously your experience is absolutely overwhelming, absolutely impressive. So thank you much again for coming, and I really look very much forward to hearing your lecture, which is about the nukes, the peace, and the future of the Korean Peninsula. So please, Professor.
Thank you, Teresa. And Professor Lee, thank you very much for inviting me. And I didn't know that University of Berlin has, the Center for Korean Studies has, Kim Dae Jung lecture. I remember about 12 years ago that the University of Cambridge invited me to give a talk on inaugural lecture of, inaugural Kim Dae Jung, memorial lecture. Therefore, it is my second time to talk about, talk at the, the Kim Dae Jung, lecture series. Also, it's my great pleasure and honor to give a talk today. And as Teresa pointed out, I was lucky to attend all the North-South Korean summits starting from 2000. I attended the 2000 June summit in Pyongyang, and 2007 Pyongyang summit, and also 2018 April Panmunjom, summit, and finally 2018 September Pyongyang summit. Therefore, I'm kind of the living witness to the North-South Korean summit. Whenever I attended the summit, I had a great vision and hope of peace. And then as time passes, nothing happened. Therefore, I was, kind of littered with a feeling of, great, expectation, despair, resignation, and another hope. Likewise, inter-Korean. By the way, let me introduce it to Global Asia. This is the quarterly journal which I edit. But this September issue, we had a special cover package on Kim Jong-un's North Korea. And I will leave this journal here so that you can read it. Really, we were able to bring together top-notch specialists in North Korea, covering politics, economy, society, and culture, and plus pandemic, public health system, effectiveness of sanction mechanism on North Korea nuclear issue, whatever. I was impressed by the quality of contribution in this journal. Therefore, I hope that you enjoyed it. And today, I'm supposed to give a talk on nukes, peace, and the future of Korea. Let us go, back to the, 4 years. In 2017, we witnessed crisis and escalation on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea undertook 6 nuclear testing and test-fired 15 ballistic missiles. Okay. And President Trump was deliberating on the military strike on North Korea. And I couldn't feel a real sense of crisis at the time because I was interviewed by more than 20 war correspondents who were rushing to Seoul for the months of July, August 2018. Therefore, I could sense the real danger at the time. And then we had, February, Pyeongchang Olympic. Things began to turn around. North Korean, the chairman of Supreme People's Congress Assembly, Kim Young-nam, came to Seoul as head of delegation, and also Kim Jong-un appointed Kim Yo-jong, his sister, as a special envoy. Their visit was extremely successful. And that was followed by the visit by Vice Chairman Kim Young-chol on the 3rd week of February. And then that again led to our special envoy's visit to Pyongyang. Jung Yong and Sohon visited Pyongyang. And the result was, Panmunjom Summit on April 27th. And that was followed by the June Singapore summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un. And again, in September, we had the fourth North-South Korean summit in Pyongyang. Therefore, 2018 was really a year of hope and peace. And at the time, two leaders, Chairman Kim Jong-un and President Moon Jae-in, declared that Panmunjom is now, we sense that war is over. We are now facing the new horizon of peace. Okay? And perhaps in all Koreans, both North and South Koreans, even in international community, were sharing the sentiment that war is eventually over, new peace is beginning. Then again, February 2019, President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un failed to produce any tangible outcome in Hanoi. And since then, there was a continuation of stalemate. Okay. Therefore, year of crisis 2017, year of hope and peace in 2018, and stalemate in 2019. But in 2020, things began to much more deteriorated. And there was some balloon sending activities by North Korean defectors in South Korea. And Kim Yo-jong responded with very terse and hardline responses. He announced the so-called Kim Yo-jong statement on June 4th, in which she described inter-Korean relations as hostile relations. And also she declared that the North Korea will be, terminating all, hotlines with the South Korea. And then June 16th, North Korea demolished our liaison building in Kaesong. That was really painful. Okay? The Moon Jae-in government worked very hard to rebuild the liaison building in Kaesong. And it was kind of symbol of a recovery of inter-Korean relations. But in North Korea, without any consultation, unilaterally demolished the building. And South Koreans were really hurt. Okay? And President Moon Jae-in was extremely disappointed at that event. And then, tension was rising. And in September, even though there was exchange of personal letters between President Moon and Chairman Kim Jong-un, then again, and a South Korean official at the Ministry of Fishery, got lost in the West Sea, and he was shot to death by North Korean Navy. And at heightened tension. Then, the 2019 was kind of an oscillation between stalemate and quasi crisis on the Korean Peninsula. And 2021, ups and downs. And on the occasion of 71st anniversary of an armistice agreement, North Korea sent a signal that we'll be restoring channels of communication with South Korea. Okay? But there was a condition. If South Korea suspend the ROK-US joint military exercise, they would restore the channels of communication. In fact, they did restore. And then when we conducted the joint exercise with the United States, they again cut off communication lines. But in late September, again, Kim Jong-un decided to restore hotlines with South Korea. And the reason was very simple, because President Moon Jae-in gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly saying that we want to push for end-of-war declaration, either between North South Korea and the United States, or North South Korea, United States, and China. And also on his flight back to Seoul, and he had a press conference in the Korea Air Force One, and he used the term low-intensity tension caused by North Korea, instead of using the term military provocation by North Korea. And North Korea took it very seriously, and they said that that's a good sign. Okay, we are willing to talk with South Korea. We'll be restoring the communication channels with South Korea. And there is a present status. Chairman Kim Jong-un, at his speech at the Spring National Assembly, declared that he will restore channels of communications. And October 4th, North Korea restored all channels of communication. That's a very good sign, because these hotlines are very important. Why? Because they can reduce tension, they can enhance confidence buildings, and they can prevent the accidental outbreak of military conflict between the North and the South. Plus, restoration of hotlines can facilitate inter-Korean exchange and cooperation. There is a current situation in South Korea. It's a really roller coaster pattern of interactions between the North and the South. It is very, very difficult to make a solid prediction on the future course of inter-Korean relations. But President Moon Jae-in has been championing the Korean peace process. His Korean peace process is to manage these kinds of hyperbolic interactions between the North and the South. In doing that, he set the goal very clearly. For him, the goal is to make the Korean Peninsula nuclear weapons free, peaceful, common, and jointly propose North and South Korea. Therefore, nuclear weapons free, peaceful, and common prosperity. That has been kind of his policy goal. In doing that, he set the four major principles. First principle is no war. At any cost, there should be no war on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, primacy, peace was his first principle. Second principle is no nukes. He strongly believed that peace cannot be achieved without denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. If either party has a nuclear weapon, or both parties have nuclear weapons, how can you achieve peace? Even if we have a peace, it will be extremely unstable peace. Therefore, his second principle is no nukes. And third principle is no regime change. You may recall that the President Moon came to Berlin and he gave a talk at the Carlsberg Stiftung. Okay? And in that speech, he made it very clear. We do not have any intention to change the regime in North Korea. Okay? We want to promote exchange and cooperation with North Korea. We want to pursue peaceful coexistence with North Korea. And for no regime change, it's a very clear message to North Korea. No regime change means what? We are not interested in pursuing unification by absorption, what we call the German model of unification. And final principle is international collaboration. President Moon knew it very clearly. Ideally speaking, if North and South Korea really committed, we can achieve unification. We can achieve peace. But the Korean Peninsula question is embedded in the big power politics in Northeast Asia. Okay? And the United States has become integral part of the Korean conflict, not only because of armistice agreement, but also because of the very nature of the Korean conflict. China is indirectly intertwined with the Korean conflict because it is a legal party to armistice agreement. Therefore, without handling big powers, we cannot achieve peace and unification on the Korean Peninsula. He has been arguing international collaboration. Therefore, no war, no nukes, no regime change, and international cooperation. They have become most important principles, his Korea Peace initiative. Then what kinds of strategies he wanted to pursue? He wanted to pursue, four strategies. In fact, he had been pursuing four strategies. First strategy is peacekeeping. Peacekeeping does not mean the UN peacekeeping activities. Peacekeeping what? Prevent outbreak of war. Through what? Through military deterrence and maintenance of alliance with the United States. Therefore, military deterrence and alliance have become very important elements of making peace on the Korean Peninsula. But if he pursues that strategy alone, then he cannot talk about Korea Peace Initiative. Because peacekeeping is a really passive way of managing peace on the Korean Peninsula. It is nothing but the security. Security in the different name of peace. This is why he pursued the second strategy. Second strategy is the peacemaking strategy. For him, peacemaking strategy refers to tension reduction, confidence building, adoption of end-of-war declaration, and transformation of armistice agreement into some sort of peace accord among parties concerned. In fact, he has been quite successful in doing that one. For example, if you look at the Pyongyang Declaration, it has Article 1 of Pyongyang Declaration is a military agreement between the North and the South. And therefore, the mutual management of peace along the demilitarized zone has been a very important part of Pyongyang Declaration. And third strategy is what I term, peace building approach. Peace building approach is all about the peace economy, 평화 경제. President Moon has been emphasizing 평화 경제. In order to achieve 평화 경제, he introduced the concept of a new economic map of the Korean Peninsula, 한반도 신경제 지도. The idea is very simple. How can you achieve peace? When we promote economic exchange and cooperation. Therefore, he was proposing interconnection, the connection of North-South Korean railroad system, road systems, network of energy corporations, and the selective economic cooperation project. Obviously, that involves the resumption of Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mount Kumgang Choice Project. His basic argument is this, even though economic exchange and cooperation cannot automatically guarantee peace, but economic exchange and cooperation will lay the very important foundation for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And finally, he has proposed the so-called proactive diplomacy. He strongly believes that the destiny of Korean Peninsula should be determined by Koreans, by themselves. We all know that the Korean Peninsula has been subject to the balance of power dynamics. Big powers have been determining the fate of the Korean Peninsula. But the President Moon's basic idea is this: we understand that objective reality of big power politics, but if we come up with a imaginative diplomacy, we can manage big powers and we can help them to work for the creation of peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is very much dovetails with President Kim Dae Jung's dismantling of the Cold War structure on the Korean Peninsula. Okay. Since it's the Kim Dae Jung lecture, his sunshine policy, there is a misunderstanding of sunshine policy. The sunshine policy is unilateral giving, 퍼주기, policy and etc. That is not true. If you look at the principles of sunshine policy, the first principle is non-toleration of military provocation. If North Korea provoke militarily, we'll retaliate. If we'll never tolerate military provocation by the North. That's number one. Second, we will not pursue unification by absorption. Third, promotion of exchange and cooperation, peaceful coexistence, and the pursuit of de facto unification. Even though South Korea would not have an institutional base for unification, such as a German unification constitution. However, we'll be pursuing exchange and cooperation, peaceful coexistence, And then that will lead us to the de facto unification. Why? Because people can move. Goods and service can move across the DMZ. The military tension along the DMZ will disappear. That is what he called the 사실상의 통일, de facto unification. That was his policy all through. Therefore, if you compare President Kim Dae Jung's, overall sunshine policy and with, Moon Jae-in's Korean Peninsula Peace Process Initiative, there is enormous continuity and similarity. And now, to what extent Moon Jae-in's policy was successful? It's mixed. If you adopt a retrospective assessment, go back to past, okay? And during the days of President Kim Dae Jung, we had 2 military crashes in the West Sea, okay? In 2010, there was a sinking of Cheonan corvette, Cheonan, and also North Korean shelling of Yeonpyeong Island. Even during the Park Geun-hye period, we had the so-called, wood landmine explosion, which, victimized 2 South Korean soldiers. Therefore, if you look back to the past, there was a heightened military tension between the North and the South. But look at the Moon Jae-in period. During his period, there was no military crashes between the North and the South. And in accordance with the military agreement, both sides what? Both sides come up with a joint survey of, Han River, and also they were able to get rid of landmines along the DMZ, particularly 화살머리 battlefield, and they were able to, recover remains of those who were killed during the Korean War. And whenever we have a so-called crab catching season in May and June, there was a heightened tension between the North and South in the West Sea. The military agreement created so-called buffer zone in that area, and both North and South have been abiding by that agreement. Therefore, we don't hear anything about the West Sea, tension. But therefore, if you look back to the past, and in retrospect, Moon Jae-in government was quite successful. But in the prospective way, we can say the Moon Jae-in government policy was a failure. Okay, Moon Jae-in government promised, end of war declaration, nothing achieved, right? And he, claimed that they will make a progress in denuclearization, right? But partly because of American policy, there was no progress in denuclearization. And we were hoping that there would be resumption of Kaesong Industrial Complex. Even just the sending of owners, South Korean owners of factories in Kaesong area into Kaesong Industrial Complex, that didn't happen. We are hoping even individual tourist visits Mount Kumgang, that didn't happen. And most importantly, reunion of separate families. President Moon Jae-in himself is a member of separate families. That he was desperate to have a reunion of separate families, but nothing happened. Okay. Therefore, judged on his promises, nothing happened. Okay. Therefore, it's a mix. And why this happened? It is very simple, because there was no progress in denuclearization. Here comes the nukes. And I think Hanoi was a critical juncture. At a time, Kim Jong-un come up with an offer saying that, okay, we will give up all the nuclear facilities in Yongbyon permanently and completely in return for North Korea's American relaxation of sanctions on North Korea, particularly those 5 Security Council resolutions that affect, North Korean access to oil, and export of fishery product, and coals, and textile product. They all relate to the civilian economy and people's livelihood. President Trump turned them down. President Trump's proposal was very simple and straightforward. Unless you, he didn't use the term, if you, dismantle all nuclear weapons and missiles of all ranges and biochemical weapons. If you do that, then we'll promise the bright future of your economy. There is no reason for Kim Jong-un to accommodate President Trump's proposal. The deal was over. Therefore, since then, on October 4th, 2019, there was a second working level meeting between the US and North Korea through the mediation of Swedish Foreign Ministry. They made it in Stockholm. Again, nothing happened. The North Korean delegate and Ambassador Kim Young-chul made it very clear that unless the United States resolve its hostile policy that threatens our survival and that hampers our people's right to development, will not return to any dialogue with the United States. North Korea has been pursuing that policy. Okay, but the key point is hostile policy, and hostile policy has two dimensions. One, don't threaten our survival. Don't threaten our survival means what? Suspend joint military exercise and training, don't deploy American strategic weapons over the Korean Peninsula, and normalize ties, with Pyongyang. Those are the basic requirements. And on the issue of hampering of North Korean people's right to development, simply refers to what? Lifting or partial lifting of sanctions against North Korea. Look, according to UN Security Council resolutions, since 2016, North Korea is allowed to have 2 million barrels of oil, refined oil per year. South Korea consumes 2 million barrels of refined oil per day, but North Korea per year. Therefore, North Korea thinks that that's really unfair. Because lack of refined oil means what? That really threatened what? North Korean agricultural production system. Not only because of lack of fuel, but also because of lack of chemical fertilizers. Therefore, North Korea has been arguing that way. But then there was a change of government in the United States, the Biden administration. And in fact, our government has been working very, very hard. And as you can see, the President Moon Jae-in met President Biden in May, and two leaders adopted joint statement on May 21st. And there are three very significant agreements. The United States declared that it will be pursuing calibrated, practical, and phased approach to North Korea. That's a good sign. Because the Trump approach was a really comprehensive and one-shot approach. But here, most important thing is practical and phased approach. And that means what? The Biden administration is willing to talk with North Korea from very much practical perspective. Second important element was what? The President Moon Jae-in was able to get the endorsement from President Biden with regard to the inter-Korean dialogue, inter-Korean engagement, and inter-Korean cooperation. And finally, the Biden administration was about to appoint the human rights ambassador to North Korea. But last minute, our government worked very hard to change it. Last minute, he didn't appoint the human rights ambassador in charge of North Korea. Instead, he appointed Sung Kim as a special envoy to North Korean issue. Those three are not insignificant. They're very, very important changes on the part of the United States. The Biden administration did not release its policy review on North Korea. The review has been, classified. But I understand there are some very hardline approaches, like a maximum pressures and intensification of sanctions on North Korea. But Biden administration is not talking about that one. That's a really result of our very hard diplomatic works on the Biden administration. But as an extension of that one, now government was trying to work on three fronts. Okay, first front is the sanction is big issue. Of course, it will be extremely difficult to change Biden administration position on the North Korea with regards to sanctions, because without North Korea's concrete moves towards denuclearization, it will be very difficult for the Biden administration to persuade the Congress, okay, to do that. However, our government has been urging the U.S. to consider, more refined attitude on the UN Security Council resolution on North Korea. On those areas, North Koreans have been, arguing for, that is, expansion, increasing, access to oil and refined, petroleum product. Okay. Second, fishery product and textile export and coal export. I don't know to what extent the Biden administration has accommodated those, that proposal, but I think that the Biden administration, has been showing some kind of changing attitude on that one. I don't know whether Biden administration has sent a very concrete message to Pyongyang directly or not, but judged on the various reports, the United States has been trying to send the Pyongyang message to the Pyongyang that, okay, we are willing to discuss these issues if we show up to the, dialogue. That is one point. Another point is end of war declaration. President Moon made that point very clear at his United Nations General Assembly speech. And also, if you look at the responses from State Department and Pentagon, they are not, negative about end of war declaration adoption. Okay, even for example, General Brooks was an American commander in South Korea. He was saying that the end of war declaration would be a very good political and symbolic gesture. Okay, and also it will not compromise on the status of American forces in South Korea and the Al-Qaeda alliance. Therefore, in that sense, there has been some changing attitude on the part of the United States. The other one is inter-Korean, cooperation. We are hoping the U.S. would bless our efforts to resume Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mount Gyeongbang Choice Project. Okay. I don't know to what extent they have made progress or not. Okay. Then now, what is the North Korean response? I don't know yet, but North Korea has shown some positive, feedback on the end of war declaration. That's a good thing. And North Korea also restored channels of communication. Okay. I personally hope that then two leaders should meet. Okay. President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un, issued two declarations: Panmunjom Declaration, Pyongyang Declaration. Okay. Before their President Moon's tenure is over. Okay. I think the North Korea should show some sincere attitude so that two leaders can make some tangible outcomes. I really don't think there would be any big breakthrough, but I still believe that there can be small successes before President Moon's term is over. But there is a structural dilemma. President Moon's term is over just less than 7 months. Chairman Kim Jong-un has a forever term. Okay, and President Biden, his term is just starting right now. Therefore, there is a kind of mismatch of domain with regards, the tenure of those three leaders. Therefore, President Moon has every reason to expedite some sort of so-called, negotiation among those three leaders. And if China can join, that will be much better too. Therefore, now, point is this, whole issue now we are debating on whether ball is in the court of Pyongyang or ball is in the court of Washington or not. But right now, ball is in the middle, okay? And President Moon is trying to really, grab the ball and so that he can bring all the relevant leaders together and come up with some kinds of progress. I'm not sure, whether he will be successful or not, but I think he will do his best to make us even small successes, which can be conducive to North Korea's concrete moves towards denuclearization, as well as to, tension reduction, confidence building on the Korean Peninsula. But again, by way of, conclusion, I would say that you cannot think of a peace in Korea without reference to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. They should go in tandem. Some people argue that peace is more important than denuclearization. Okay? Therefore, we should talk about peace. Within that framework, we talk about denuclearization. But I don't agree with that idea. That, North Korean possession of nuclear weapons has been triggering new patterns of arms race on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. Okay? It's a very serious mess. It is not simply a matter of a nuclear deterrence among the parties concerned, but it has been triggering arms race in conventional weapon systems too. It is not just between the North and the South, Japan involved. And then China, has been responding to the move. Therefore, it is a very serious matter. Well, I personally hope that, we should realize that the negative consequences of, North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons. And more than that, now there's a growing number of American opinion makers who have been pushing for the idea of South Korean possession of nuclear weapons. Think about North Korea has a nuclear weapon, South Korea has a nuclear weapons, then Japan will have a nuclear weapon, Taiwan will have a nuclear weapons, will have a nuclear domino. We don't want it. That is why we should think about the delicate linkage between nuclear issue and peace issues in a very significant way. And again, we are having presidential election in March next year. And next government will be very, very important in shaping the future course of the dynamics on the Korean Peninsula. But I still hope that they can all work for the creation of peace while reducing or eliminating nuclear threat. It's not easy, but that is our mandate. That is a mandate of history. I will stop here.
Well, thank you very much. I can hear the audience here clapping. Thank you very much for having very positive talk, but yet critical. And that's, I think, very important to be able to be objective and objectively say what works and what doesn't, but at the same time not to give up hope. I would now like to move to the discussion and question and answer session. We will try to have a hybrid format in terms of the questions. Of course, everyone who is here is encouraged to ask questions. Please raise your hand and I will then give you a floor, but so that everyone can hear it well, I will then try to summarize your question for the audience online. So if I may ask, be quite brief so that I can summarize it quite well. But before I give a chance to everyone here and online, I would also like to raise some questions. You touched a little bit upon, the Biden's administration approach, right? And you sounded very positive in terms of the summit and the statement which came out of the meeting in May. Yet we haven't actually seen much progress when it comes to the denuclearization and anything to do with the United States, also including the sanctions that you mentioned. We just had a panel of experts report, which obviously was very critical. So how do you see, and also I would say in terms of U.S. policies in general for the region, in my opinion, the priority, when it comes to denuclearization and when it comes to the Korean Peninsula as such, sort of decreased on the agenda on the U.S. foreign policy priorities, and in the region is probably the relationship with China, which rules, which is the most important policy for the United States. So, how do you see, this whole context, and also, how would you evaluate Biden's administration's policies?
So you're right. North Korea has been, placing relatively low priority in the Biden foreign policy agenda because obviously China matters and withdrawal from Afghanistan. Okay, those things have become very, very important issues. But however, our South Korean government has been trying to maintain the momentum of President Biden's political attention to North Korea. Therefore, I wouldn't say that really North Korean nuclear issue is on such a low, priority in the Biden administration. But I haven't read, the policy review by the Biden administration. But it is my understanding that it has accommodated all three contending, views of how to deal with North Korean issues. First is maximum pressures and the sanctions, because those guys who propose maximum pressures and sanctions argue that North Korea has no intention to give up nuclear weapons in order to maintain his own political power. Okay, Kim Jong-un will never give up nuclear weapons. Therefore, the only way is to press him to give it up. Otherwise, there could be internal collapse. That hardline position, I would say that represents the mainstream in Washington. Second perspective is a negotiated settlement. And, William Perry, Robert Gallucci, all these so-called people who have negotiated with North Korea have been arguing that the maximum pressure won't work, sanctions won't work. The most important thing is that we got to talk with the North Koreans, okay? And we should pursue all the strategy of action for action. Therefore, incremental approach with give and take in a formula, what they call the simultaneous exchange. Okay? And therefore, dialogue and diplomacy, okay? Dialogue and negotiation, or so-called diplomatic approach is the only way to solve the North Korean nuclear problem. Because there is no reason for North Korea to give up nuclear weapons, not simply because of, it's a political power, the survival reason, but also because of, from military perspective, how can North Korea give up nuclear weapons, which what they call the treasure, cherished treasure, okay, without corresponding incentive from the United States. Therefore, we should work out, step by step, okay, approach. Third approach is, kind of stable management of North Korean problem, okay. And a lot of folks who work for the Biden administration tend to believe that the North Korean nuclear problem cannot be solved anytime soon. The important thing is how to manage North Korean behavior. And from that perspective, deterrence becomes important. Alliance becomes important. Coordination among Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul becomes very important. And these are kind of view, held by the Jake Sullivan or, Blinken, the Secretary of State, those mainstream guys within the Biden administration. Therefore, there is a kind of very strange cohabitation of those three different views in the Biden administration. Therefore, our government's active diplomacy has been making Biden administration to move toward negotiate settlement through diplomacy, but still we do not know. It all depends on North Korea. If North Korea shows much more, positive attitude and come out to dialogue, okay, and willing to, have a negotiated settlement, then maybe those guys who are advocating, diplomacy in Washington will have more power. If North Korea continues to reject the American offer, okay, try to, pursue somewhat circumventive diplomacy by aligning itself with China, etc., then Washington's response will be very hardline in the policy in North Korea. But up to now, so far, if you look at the North American diplomatic gesture, they are showing willingness to talk with North Korea with some sort of authenticity. Okay? I cannot deny it. But with regard to President Biden's commitment, I have some doubt. That's why President Moon has been pushing very hard. In that regard, for example, there could be one idea because, I would say that Kim Jong-un and North Korean leadership are still suffering from the Hanoi trauma. Because at the time, they came to Hanoi with great anticipation that President Trump would give a big deal, okay, with regard to North Korea. But they come with big deal, and they returned with no deal. And North Koreans would think that they were deceived by President Trump. Okay, and therefore, if something happened, okay, that would be disaster to Chairman Kim Jong-un's political leadership. It can hurt the legitimacy. Therefore, unless Biden administration comes up with very concrete and specific incentive, it will be extremely hard for Kim Jong-un or any North Korean government officials to return to dialogue and negotiation. You all know, because Kim Jong-un's, governance style is simply what task-oriented. If you make a proposal on something, and you deliver it. If you do not deliver it, you get punished. Okay? Therefore, what we call in Korean word, it's called 과업 중심적 leader, 지도자. Therefore, it's a task-oriented leader. Therefore, working level people would be extremely, cautious, even afraid of making proposals. Even if there is a proposals coming from Washington, and they make a report to the Kim Jong-un saying that we should go to the negotiation table. If no result comes out, then they get punished. Then why the hell they would make a proposal to Chairman Kim Jong-un? We should go back to dialogue and negotiation. That is why we need the so-called more intersubjective understanding. You place yourself in North Korean shoes. In that way, you can find better solutions. But the American way tend to be just unilateral. Okay.
And how does, in this equation, fit the effort for the end of war declaration? We had Minister of Unification visiting Berlin 2 weeks ago. He visited our institute. He had meetings with the government. He also was previously in Brussels. So how do you think that this could this be the initiative? Or
Yeah, because first of all, as Minister Lee Young said, the end of war declaration proposal is all about the symbolic and the political. It's just the expression of our willingness to end the Korean War, which lasted more than 70 years old. But there is another meaning. Once North South Korea, US and China sit together and they adopt end of war declaration, that will create a very important momentum of a continuity. Therefore, even if we have a new government in Korea in next May, they cannot turn it around. Okay, there is what you call some sort of so-called informal institutionalization of peace process. Okay, otherwise there will be any ground for which the leaders of 4 countries sit together and push for the peace on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, it is one thing is in a political and symbolic gesture. On the other hand, is for some sort of so-called informal institutionalization of peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Third, it has an instrumental goal. What is it? Once we adopt the end of war declaration, that means what? To the extent there is reduction of animosity and tension on the Korean Peninsula, then that will help North Korea to push for the denuclearization. That will help for the tension reduction and confidence building on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, end of war declaration is not simply President Moon's legacy politics gesture. It's more than that. It has a multiple objectives.
And do you see that Biden administration or maybe the Chinese side would support that too?
So far, the American government didn't say no, but it didn't give a affirmative, response either. But Chinese government supported the idea, and obviously, Kim Jong-un, Chairman Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo-jong sent a very positive response to that one. South Korean government supported it. Therefore, at least 3 parties supported it. If the United States supported the idea, then 4 leaders can sit together.
Well, fingers crossed for this one. So I would now probably like to turn to the audience here and also encourage our viewers online if you would like to ask any questions. So maybe I'll start here. Perhaps would anyone like to?
You came to front seat, to raise your question.
I remember one paper by Bruce Cummings written for the State Department, 1981 or so. You talked about 3 scenarios that are discussed in conflict. And in this paper, he suggested that North Korea would become an ally of the United States. Yeah. So the United States would have 2 allies on the Korean Peninsula, North and South Korea. No? Under present circumstances, where Biden is following a very open anti-Chinese course, one might imagine that this 4th scenario could be an option for the US too. That means they have plenty of allies around China. That would be an additional essential ally that will play an important role in this confrontation with China.
Yeah, that argument is really advocated by what you call the real realist in Washington.
Yes.
Henry Kissinger is a perfect example of real realist. What their matters is their primary goal is how to contain China. The containing China and maintaining American supremacy is the primary goal of American foreign policy. If that is the American goal, then why don't we co-opt North Korea? Make North Korea an ally of the United States. But problem is American policy is not solely determined by the national interest. American foreign policy is often determined by values. Therefore, Democratic Party, which is ruling the United States right now, they said human rights matters, democracy matters. Then there is a kind of tension between national interest and American value. Therefore, even though realists in the U.S. proposed that idea, why don't we make North Korea as American ally? Okay. Even North Koreans, if you go back to the days of Kim Il-sung, okay, Kim Jong-il, even Kim Jong-un, those periods, they really want to have a good relationship with the United States. Okay. I don't know, because I asked once one North Korean friend, whom do you distrust more? He didn't answer to me. But let me give one good anecdote by the Im Dong-won. Im Dong-won prepared in the first Korean summit. And in fact, when he met Kim Jong-un second time, that was April 2002. You remember that after Bush 43 was inaugurated, the President Bush was describing North Korea as an axis of evil and etc. Then Kim Jong-il, Chairman Kim Jong-il was not coming out. North Korea was not interacting with South Korea. And President Kim Dae Jung sent Im Dong-won to Pyongyang to figure out what's going on. And in fact, the 2 things. One is, at a time, Kim Jong-il answered in this way. We are not coming out to talk with South Korea because of fluidity of international situation. That means in the advent of the Bush administration in the U.S. And also in the course of dialogue, Chairman, what Im Dong-won asked, Chairman Kim Jong-il, why don't you improve ties with the United States? And Kim Jong-il answered in this way, okay, we are afraid of the United States. The United States has a really formidable power to strike us, okay? Therefore, we wanted to improve ties with the United States. But we cannot trust the United States. every 4 years, there is a change of leadership. Okay, how can we trust the United States? Okay, and then he asked, then how about China? Why don't you rely on China? We cannot trust China either. Therefore, we cannot trust US, you cannot trust China. Our option is to have nuclear weapons. I think that really, underscores, kind of overall sentiment of the North Korean leadership.
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent, because the question was whether North Korea could actually, in the end, become ally of the United States, especially because of the tensions with Asia. Just to repeat it for the online audience, I mean, to some extent, there is a precedent with Vietnam, which obviously has been, at war with the United States now as one of the, closest allies in Southeast Asia. So there is some precedent in that direction. Yeah. Maybe I would ask now a slightly different question that goes more in the direction of humanitarian situation and sanctions, and of course the COVID-19 situation, because to some extent, if there is any chance for economic cooperation, especially, there has to be the COVID-19 situation has to be solved for the DPRK to some extent. So, how do you see, for instance, cooperation on the vaccines? The last message from North Korea, when it was offered Chinese vaccines, it rejected it. But of course, the borders are still closed. There's a bit of more trade than it used to be, but basically it's close to zero with China and the others too. So, if you look at the humanitarian situation, the COVID-19 situation, how could we proceed in that direction, and what especially South Korean government could do in this regard?
Yeah, there has been a fundamental change in North Korean overall policy, because Kim Jong-un has been emphasizing 인민대중 제일주의, people first, politics. Up until very recently, North Korea has been pursuing 선군 정치, military first politics. But there has been fundamental transformation from military first politics to people first politics. That's a very significant transformation which we should not underestimate. And reason is very simple. North Korean people are suffering from COVID-19, from the bad harvest last year, and flooding, natural disaster, and lack of fertilizers, lack of energy, have been really, devastating North Korean agriculture sector, and also prolonged sanctions and subsequent, deterioration of North Korean economy. Therefore, all those three things have been putting enormous pressures on North Korean people. North Korean people are suffering. And Chairman Kim Jong-un's legitimacy will be fundamentally damaged as a result of the deterioration of the quality of life of North Korean people. And that is why he has been emphasizing the, people's livelihood. If you look at the 노동신문 daily basis, okay, great chunk of, 노동신문, it has been paid to the issue of how to improve the quality of life of North Korean people. Therefore, from that point of view, North Korea is more than willing to have interactions with the United States and South Korea, etc. But again, North Korean quarantine model is very different from others because its public health system is so fragile. Therefore, their way is just the lockdown is the only way. Now, precisely since February 7th last year up to now, North Korea has been complete lockdown. Okay, but one good sign is this. Okay? Therefore, it is very mixed signals. For example, it is my understanding that in July, the United States was willing to provide about 2 million doses of, Moderna and Pfizer to North Korea. Apparently, North Korea turned it down, and they suggest the U.S. to donate to the Gavi, and then Gavi, they may get, Moderna, and Pfizer. But again, most recently, the Gavi was willing to provide North Korea with 3 million doses. But North Korea said that we send them to the other developing countries which are suffering from the lack of vaccine. And therefore, it is very, on the one hand, there's all kinds of rumor and speculation that North Korea is suffering from the widespread COVID-19. But on the other hand, if you look at the North Korean behavior, apparently North Korea has been successful in protecting themselves from the penetration of COVID-19. But one thing you might have read the report that North Korea, the WHO announced that North Korea allowed the shipment from the Taran airport some COVID-19 related medical supplies, and also it is my own understanding that there is about 110,000 metric tons of grain, which China is supposed to give to North Korea. And there is a speculation that the grain shipment will take place very soon. Therefore, North Korea will be opening very soon. But again, North Korean people are suffering lots, and the North Korean leader is very well aware of that hardship. And maybe that can be one kind of impetus to encourage North Korea to come out and talk with South Korea and the United States. But we should never politicize it. If that is the case, they will never come out. Therefore, let the North Korea make decisions, and we just respond.
Thank you. So the question is from Gwendoline Domining, who is our PhD student, and she was asking about two types of negotiations with the PRK. The one where you have the high-level summits, but she was more interested in sort of the informal levels of negotiations with the North Korean diplomats and experience that Professor Moon made in those negotiations.
It's a very interesting question. In fact, all the Korean summit was arranged through the back-channel diplomacy. All the important negotiation between the United States and North Korea was arranged through the back channel. In fact, William Burns, who is the director of CIA, wrote a very interesting book on this back channel. And also I myself wrote a piece at the Brown Journal of World Affairs on the role of back channel diplomacy in arranging Korean summit. Okay? Therefore, you can check with the Brown Journal of World Affairs. And you're absolutely right, because once North Korean delegate and South Korean delegate meet together officially, then you have a domestic audience in North Korea and domestic audience in South Korea. Then from that time on, there is what we call the kiss sound. Therefore, how to translate the kiss sound? Okay, it's a kind of prestige, rivalry between the North and South. Okay, therefore, for example, setting up the flag, North Korean flag and South Korean flag, and North Korea always want to be higher than the South Korean flag. South Koreans argue that, we should be higher than. Then these kinds of all trivial and ceremonial issues tend to devour entire negotiation process. Okay, and again, North Korea and South Korea saying once we have a delegate at official meeting, we should show much, macho attitude. Then South Korean audience and media will love that one. Same for North Koreans. Therefore, there cannot be any compromise. If you show compromise, that becomes a sign of weakness. In order to avoid all these kinds of, troubles, it is much better to have a back channel, informal talks first, arranging agenda first. And then, official talks become simply rubber stamping and ceremonial. Therefore, without having this informal back channel communications, just having track one diplomacy alone cannot fix these things. Therefore, inter-Korean relations, for example, our National Intelligence Service, that's all the back channel works. Of course, our Ministry of Unification officials joined it too. But once things become Once agreement is reached between the North and the South, then official discussions done by the Minister of Unification its North Korean counterpart. Okay, therefore, you're absolutely right. Back-channel diplomacy is very, very important, not only just inter-Korean relations, but also in other diplomatic affairs.
Well, thank you. Always the most interesting questions come from PhD students, so thank you for that. And I assume that, negotiations over a few glasses of soju might be the most effective one too. But I have now a question from the online audience, so I would like to ask them one. It comes from Nicholas Seltzer, and he asked about CVID, and he says CVID is a non-starter as an opening position for nuclear negotiations. Could you talk about what might become more practical and effective way to engage North Korea in denuclearization talks?
That's a very good question too. The term CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantling, was coined by one of assistant to John Bolton during the days of Bush administration. It's a very, young, intern, a young assistant to John Bolton coined the term, and all of a sudden that became very popular. Okay, I think since the December 2003, okay? And particularly when Libya reached an agreement with the United States, okay, all of a sudden, CVID become, big issue. But the whole point is this: complete means what? How do you know complete without full North Korea's full cooperation? It's a scope, okay? Verifiable. Without declaring what North Korea has, you cannot have, verification, right? And irreversible. Anything can happen as long as the nuclear scientists, survive. They can rebuild the nuclear bombs too. Therefore, CVID, sounds great, but in real terms, they're extremely impractical. Okay, reaching an agreement on the scope, meaning the comprehensive, is extremely difficult. Verification is difficult, and irreversible is totally impossible. Anything can happen. Okay, therefore, using that kinds of terms, because and furthermore, North Korea regards that kinds of terminology extremely, intrusive and rude. Okay. And also another good example is this. For example, in July 2018, after Singapore summit, Michael Pompeo visited Pyongyang, and he asked his counterpart that you come up with a declaration. To have a declaration, you got to submit the full list of your nuclear facilities, nuclear metals, and nuclear weapons. And then Kim Young-chul, his counterpart, just ridiculed him, saying that we're not dumb. Okay, and if we rebuild all our nuclear facilities, nuclear metals, and nuclear weapons, their locations, their quality, whatever, if the United States bomb makes a military strike on us, we'll be loser. And then he was citing look at the case of Iraq, look at the case of Libya. Unless we build the trust, we cannot get into stage of declaration. Okay. Therefore, solution is very simple. Okay, first we need some initial measures, 초기 조치, to build the trust. Once you build the trust, maybe the scope may not be completely comprehensive. It could be partial, the Yongbyun facilities, and also we can come up with some evidence using satellite intelligence, whatever, and they come up with some list. No, you have more. Okay, there's evidence. You should include those facilities too. Therefore, that kind of so-called incremental, piecemeal approach is the only way to solve the problem. And also, to be honest with you, North Korea will not give the last weapons. Okay, no, as long as the North Korean system, continues, then they will feel enormous vulnerability. Therefore, until the last moment of complete normalization between Washington and Pyongyang, North Korea may not give up the nuclear weapons. Therefore, it's a dynamic process. Therefore, I agree with Nicholas that he raised a very important question. We got to be more realistic. Okay, we got to have some kind of intersubjective understanding. We need to be more practical. Okay, we need to have a true directional approach. But up to now, I think the American approach has been, as CBID, the word CBID, illustrate American approach has been unilateral, okay, and top down, okay, and kind of pressurizing approach. That kind of approach will lead nowhere.
Perhaps a bit unfortunate is that CBID is now anchored in the UN resolutions. So even our European representatives don't want to give up on that term.
That is thanks to Japan. Mm-hmm. Japan has been championing CBID. The CBID has become, it started with John Bolton assistant. Now it has become official position of Japan. Therefore now European Union has been taking sides with Japan in spreading word CBID.
So I have a few other questions online. So I'll ask one by In Young Min. The question is, there seems to be a zero-sum relationship between peacekeeping and peacemaking when it comes to the reduction of joint military exercises. There's been reduced joint military exercises between South Korea and the US. If there's been reduced joint military exercises, then it would have to sacrifice deterrence capabilities against North Korea. How would you reconcile this?
That's another good question, because there's an inherent contradiction between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Because Korean reality is contradictory. On the one hand, we want peace. On the other hand, we want to avoid the peace by preparing for the peace. Therefore, going back to all the baggage use in a dictum, okay, if you want peace, prepare for war. Okay, von Clausewitz has been also, championing the dictum. If you want a peace, prepare for war. That paradigm is very much immersed into the idea of peacekeeping and peacemaking. But my basic argument is this: even though it is contradictory, if you make successes in peacemaking, then that will naturally lead to the low level of peacekeeping. Because if you have a tension reduction and confidence building and arms control, arms limitation, arms reduction, that will affect peacekeeping activities. The whole point is, as a sovereign state, you cannot give up, military deterrence. Okay, but you can pursue military deterrence at lower scale if you become successful in peacemaking. Therefore, we can pursue, both strategies together, but we should place more emphasis on peacemaking that can then deter, peacekeeping approach through military deterrence and alliance.
And how would you say that it is then reflected on the North Korean side? Because obviously we've seen recently, not ballistic missile tests, but tests of new weapons, especially those on the train, and sort of creative ways. You may want to strive for.
No, it's a mirror image. We have been test launching Hyunwoo-4. We have been test launching submarine launched in the ballistic missile. Okay, we have been acquiring Global Hope. Okay, high altitude unmanned reconnaissance and surveillance plane. Okay, we have been acquiring F-35 stealth fighter. Okay, and also North Korea showing the similar kind of behavior as a reaction to South Korea's arms acquisition pattern. That we should get away from this kind of vicious circle. We can do it by paying more attention to peacemaking as opposed to peacekeeping.
Thank you. So we have probably time for 2 more questions. So I would take one from the audience, and I have one from our online viewers. So if there is one our last question in this room. Yes. Yes, well, thank you for a question close to home from Henrik, another PhD student, who was asking what Professor Moon would wish from the new German government. And I would maybe add from the whole of Europe or the European Union to do, because in Henrik's views, the German policies up to date were not... were rather disappointing. I think you used the word, right? So what could Germany and Europe do?
That's a very, very, interesting question. Up to now, we have been learning from the German experience of unification, which is unification by absorption. Okay, North Korea doesn't like that idea. Okay, but I believe that Germany has made a lot of contributions to the Helsinki Final process, the Helsinki Final Act, and overall Helsinki process throughout Europe. You have been making, your scholars have been producing, Hans Maul is a good example, have been producing a lot of works on confidence building measures, okay, confidence and security building measures, and etc. Therefore, I think it's time for us to learn. If you have a new government in Germany, and the new government will be paying more attention to peace, confidence building measures, and increased security cooperation among Europeans while reducing dependence in the United States and etc. But that kind of experience will be very, very valuable to the Korean audience. Okay, therefore, from the unification paradigm to peace paradigm or confidence building paradigm. Okay. In fact, I have been talking with Professor Lee. Maybe we can start a new project between Sejong Institute and your center about how to learn from the European experience of peacemaking and how those kinds of new experiences can be applied to the Korean Peninsula. In the past, we have been talking about unification, but now we can talk about peacemaking in Europe and the lessons for Korea. Okay. And if the Social Democratic Party is able to build a new coalition, and I think new government will be very much interested in that idea. And in fact, before I came over here, representative in the Fredom Stiftung in Seoul, okay, proposed that idea, and I think that would be a wonderful idea. Because up to now, we have been getting proposals from Brussels about how Europe can participate in the Indo-Pacific strategy, and how South Korea and Europe can cooperate in joining, the Indo-Pacific strategy. Instead of doing that one, you made the great history in 1970s, Helsinki Final Act of 1975. That's a really great innovative idea for peace. Okay, why can we learn from the European experiences? Okay.
Thank you. And I would add, as someone who comes from Central and Eastern Europe, from Czech Republic, actually the way how our region joined the EU is perhaps, bit better learning process than actually the German unification. But that would be, for another academic seminar here. So that means that we are getting towards the end of this wonderful 1.5 hour lecture and discussion. I have one last question online from Kathy Kang, who is a PhD candidate at Sofia University. And she is asking about your personal recommendations on books and journals on South North Korea negotiations. Well, I would surely recommend Global Asia to
Sofia
read.
University in Tokyo?
No, in Bulgaria.
In Bulgaria, because
yes.
there is Sofia University in Tokyo.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's she's in the city of Sofia in Bulgaria. Your recommendations, and of course, if you would like to say a few concluding words.
But most Western, she can have internet access to Global Asia for free. Okay, therefore, www.globalasia.org. We have been featuring, several cover packages on, North Korean nuclear negotiation and recent changes under Kim Jong-un leadership. Therefore, it's good. And also, she can have access to Sejong Institute. We have a number of researchers doing that one. But ask her to contact me, okay?
Yes.
I'll the list.
Yes.
So many, okay.
So as you can hear, and of course, I would recommend everything what Professor Moon has written. So that's definitely one of the best contributions to this field. So with that, it was a very nice conclusion on what to read and what to study. Thank you very much, Professor Moon, for joining us here at the Institute for Korean Studies and Korea Europe Center. Thank you very much for your insights and for your very frank discussion.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Okay.